Here's another show you can enjoy in the True Story FM family of entertainment podcasts.
Ever wonder where the devil got his horns?
How about those cloven hooves?
Or that pitchfork?
Wasn't he an angel?
No, he was a snake.
No, he's the great red dragon.
No, he's the beast.
He's the prince of this world.
Prince of darkness.
Well, he's the prince of dark.
Good morning, Star Lovelies. One of my names is Lester Ryan Clark.
And I sometimes go by Keenan Diaz.
And we're the hosts of the brand new podcast, The Devil's Details. What comes to mind when I say Lucifer?
How about Satan?
What about just the devil? How did the big bad of the Western world end up with so many faces? Join us as we dig up, decipher, and deconstruct the devil's many forms throughout history.
Take a guided tour with Dante through the 9 circles of hell.
Or revisit Satan's angsty bad boy years in Paradise Lost.
Learn the ins and outs of a Faustian contract.
Easier than a 1099, but with a hell of a lot more fine print.
Slither on over to The Devil's Details on True Story FM and join us in the diabolic discussion.
Love and hisses. Mwah! Didn't Al Pacino play him in a movie?
Are you sure that wasn't Robert De
I could
Niro?
have sworn it was Tim Curry.
That was Elizabeth
Didn't
Hurley.
he go down to Georgia at some point?
Hello, howdy, good morning, good afternoon, and good night. Today we are here, the Star Wars Generations team, to take a deep dive into Season 1 of The Acolyte. I'm joined, as always, for the generational things by people who are not of my generation, but are somehow legally allowed to drive. Erin McGowan and Alex Korman. Why don't we start with the child, Erin McGowan. How are you doing today?
Hey y'all, I'm good. It's been a busy day. I went to the gym before work, so I'm feeling very successful today. I'm excited for this conversation. I am awake and I'm ready.
I do want to say, Erin commented that she a little bit missed when I would call her the child. So I called you the child again, and then you made a grumpy look at me. So
Because that's our thing.
you're mercurial. I get it.
I get it.
Summer of the Alex, how about you?
I'm all right, also very, very busy day and week. Some heavy stuff at work, but I'm excited to talk about Star Wars to get my mind off everything else.
Cool.
Mhm.
So let's just kind of dive into it. The Acolyte, what do y'all think?
Okay, I would say on a scale of 1 to 10, considering story, acting, kind of everything, it probably ranks at like a 6.5 for me. I would say that there was no episode that I did not enjoy, but there was not an episode where I didn't pick out something that bugged me, whether it was a moment of acting, canon continuity errors, something I just didn't agree with story-wise. And again, that doesn't take away my enjoyment from the show. I still really liked it. I would watch it again. I think that some of the reveals and setups of the final episode do have me a little more excited than for season 2. Hopefully that we get that. But yeah, I don't know. I think that they're like, out of all the Star Wars shows that come out under Disney, probably my least favorite overall. But again, still a 6.5. I still enjoyed it.
Okay.
Interesting.
Erin, what about yourself?
I was very entertained, and that is all I can ask for, honestly. Personally, there wasn't maybe in early episodes, I don't remember a specific instance where I was like, that's bad acting or that's bad writing. Like, that takes me out of the story. I tend to stay in stories pretty well, and I liked the story that they told. I like how conflicting it is. Like, it's not the classic original trilogy, what appears to be, good and evil. There's depth and there's a lot to the conversation, which is exactly how real life is, which I liked a lot. My dad was not a fan because in his mind, Star Wars is good and bad.
Right.
Okay, that's cool. He can have that opinion, but so I understand how some people didn't like the show. If we're rating it, I don't know, probably like a 7.
Makes sense.
Maybe an 8. I enjoyed it a lot, but it's not like top tier Star Wars Disney shows, but I would watch it again happily.
Yeah, I have kind of a collection of thoughts, and they're kind of similar to where you guys are, though I think I do rank it higher, not numerically, but compared to some of the other shows than especially Alex does. Because I think it's probably in my top 3 or 4. Better, I think, significantly better than I think Obi-Wan or
Book of Boba Fett.
Ahsoka or some of the others. I liked Book of Boba Fett more than a lot of other people did.
I did too.
I like Boba Fett a lot. I love that show.
Yeah. I think for me though, in many ways, and I said a little bit of this before, but I'll say it in more detail now. And Alex, pause before you jump down my throat.
I will not jump down anyone's throat. Don't worry.
Don't give into your emotions.
Hmm.
I feel like the place that this holds in the overall Star Wars story is very similar to me of Revenge of the Sith, in that it tells us a lot of very important parts of the Star Wars story. I will probably be referring back to, like, if you ask me about the Jedi, if you ask me about why did the Jedi fall, or what should the Jedi be, or the nature of justice in the galaxy, or the role of the Senate and the Republic, I'm going to refer to this all the time. Like, I feel like it really helps to fill in a lot of the gaps of the overall story and does a lot of that stuff. I just think some of the actual execution of it was not done as well as it could have been. And I have some thoughts about that we're definitely going to talk about, because I think a lot of it comes down to the pacing and the growing frustration that I think a lot of people have with this particular format of 6 to 8 30 to 40 minute episodes, which I just think really did not work for this, and we'll talk about that. Granted, I also think that I think in another way I would also compare it to the Clone Wars in terms of also fills in a lot of really important stuff to learn about the galaxy, has incredible high notes. I think the acting of particularly Amanda Stenberg and Lee Jung Jae is some of, if not two of the absolute best performances we've ever seen in a Star Wars story. So I think there were absolutely really, really high notes. There were also some things that I think just didn't come together as much as they could have, but that overall, and this is kind of something we've talked about before, about in terms of how much should I enjoy watching it, I would say watching it week to week was probably about a 6. When I went back and watched it all in one sitting, it's probably an 8. And in terms of what it tells me about Star Wars, it's a 10.
Okay. I like those kind of categories. That makes sense.
Yeah.
I haven't watched it all the way through back to back to back, so I might have a different opinion while doing that.
Yeah, I haven't done that yet either, so that will be interesting.
But I don't know if I found a single Star Wars show where I have not enjoyed it more when I've watched it all in one go.
Yeah.
It's a good point. Good point.
I think Andor really worked for the week-to-week pacing it had.
No, that's fair. That's fair. That's a slow burn.
True.
That's a slow burn show.
But I think this one, more than any others, suffered in the week-to-week because it is just, well, we'll get into that with things we didn't like. Let's talk about the things that we're going to talk about things we liked, talk about things we didn't like, and then we're going to talk about what this means for the larger Star Wars story in terms of like the Jedi and the Republic and the Senate and all that. So let's just start with, what did we like?
I liked the characters. We had a lot of really great characters in this show. I mean, that's like kind of a broad thing to say, but like even the smaller characters of like Jecki and Yord, they were only around for half the show, which we didn't know at the start of the show, but they were still very impactful characters. And it's, just very interesting to see. We had like stellar actors all around in this show. Like big names, big emotions, even if they weren't big names, people who act very well. And I just really appreciated how alive this part of the Star Wars story felt. Like it really did. It had a big job. It's introducing us visually to a portion of Star Wars, like a time in Star Wars that we've never seen before. And I think they did it so well. Like the costume design is beautiful, the acting, the makeup. I enjoyed a lot about this show, and I really enjoyed Basil. I'll be honest. I really liked Basil.
Yep.
That was some nice comedic relief. We got the little stance he would do, like, I'm a square up with you. It's like, you're 1.5 feet tall, but okay.
I saw a tweet, maybe you sent it to me, Aaron, that was like, it felt like the whole show that Basil was like in his own show, like his own main character show that was just happening at the same time and place as the Acolyte. Because Basil was just doing his own thing. And I was here for it.
And here's the thing. I think Star Wars often has that, and sometimes it's done well, and sometimes it feels forced. I love The Last Jedi. I think Last Jedi is one of, if not the best Star Wars movie. I think the Porgs feel a little forced. They're trying to be that kind of moments of cuteness. My favorite moment, honestly, is when we see Chewbacca roasting one of them and the others look sad.
Oh my God.
Okay, so that was a little dark in me, but moving on.
It's funny.
both them and Pip, the comedic moments they got out of those two. First of all, I love that just starting, I think, with Jedi Survivor, the video games, now like all of our heroes have to have some like small little pocket robot. And it's basically like Disney princesses with their little chittering animals. And I just absolutely love it. I'm so here for it. Yeah, so I would agree with all that. I thought the character work was so well done. The acting, the directing, really just across the board. And because it felt so nuanced. And again, I don't mean to keep comparing it to it, but I think it's because this is about the fall of a Jedi to the dark side, really to a Jedi and a potential Jedi in different ways. The most natural comparison to me is Revenge of the Sith, which to me, not to everybody, but for me, it was painting a lot of very nuanced topics with a very broad brush. And I just felt like this and maybe it's because it wasn't long enough, this captured the nuance so much more in ways that, like, I think it would be easy to walk away from this if it hadn't been done well and been like, oh, Saul became a Sith, or Osha fell entirely to the dark side. And, Saul and Osha both, I think, fall to the dark side to some extent or another. One of them makes a conscious decision to go down that road. One is never doing anything except for what he understands to be his motivations towards others.
Right.
It's two fundamentally different journeys for different reasons in different directions, but that are both dark side influenced. And like that level of nuance is just something I've very rarely seen in Star Wars properties, and I really loved.
Yeah. I think for me, the thing I really liked about the show overall was that it deepened a lot of the lore that was, introduced in the prequels. And that's the kind of stuff that like I get really into, and everything from I know other people were like displeased with it, but the fact that like, I don't know, the Sith stealing the idea for how to like create life through the Force from a bunch of witches on a desolate planet literally sounds like something straight out of an EU book. Like it feels very like just in line with the kind of stuff that I was reading as a kid. I like the fact that we were getting to explore not only like this weird versions in the Force, but also to see on screen like a lightsaber, a kyber crystal bleed is something I've wanted to see for a very long time. Yeah. I have known the tragedy of Darth Plagueis the Wise by heart for like most of my life, literally most of my living, breathing moments, and to finally see him in live action, it just felt like a lot of like moments and things that like dove into this like deeper lore that I was really excited about. And also beyond that, something I will give this show especially is some of the best lightsaber duels in all of Star Wars movies, shows. I mean, the choreography. I know the Rogue One folks choreographed the battle on the planet. Its name is Bendoc. Thank you. But like just both the battles, both the one where we lost literally like 10 Jedi, and the one where Soul was fighting. I'm still gonna call him Darth Teeth and Darth Back Muscles. I know he has a real name, but it's too funny to me. But they were just amazing. They were full of emotion, and they were raw, and they were a little scary, and using cortosis. Like it's just so many interesting elements from lore that I've wanted to see in live action were finally put in front of me. And it was cool. It was also cool to see someone who you thought could possibly fall to the dark side, but you weren't sure. Like to see a fall happen in real time like that. Like it just like Anakin's was slow, Osha's was fast, and it was cool to see that difference.
Yeah. Oh, it's interesting. I thought you were talking about Saul's, but yeah, which I think
Saul too, but like Osha, like
Saul's is very slow. I think
Osha's full tilt, like just.
So one thing I do want to quickly say about what you were talking about is to offer a mea culpa. When we talked last time about just episode 8, I kind of stood strong against the idea that we label this person Darth Plagueis because I didn't think that anything in the text had said that it was. Since then, the author has confirmed that that is Darth Plagueis and that she's meaning to bring parts of the Darth Plagueis book into the canon. I don't love the idea that we only learn the identity of things because of stuff outside of the story. Like, to me, he's never actually going to be Kyle Mundy until someone on screen calls him Kyle Mundy, but we had to learn it from the credits. And here, like, if you want that to be Darth Plagueis, have us learn that in some way. Or just have it be up in the air and have us learn it at a later point. I don't like that method of storytelling, but I will now fully agree that it is 100% Darth Plagueis.
Yeah.
And to everything you said, yeah, I love bringing all that in. I love the Cortosis, which is both old legacy canon, but also that appears in some of the newer Thrawn novels that are part of the Disney canon. Just being able to see again so much more of the Sith and the nuance. So many of the conversations I think have gone like zeroed down to, well, if Chimer is a Sith, then there can only be one accomplice, Acolyte. So how can Darth Plagueis be there as well? So it must be this, or it must be this, or Yoda must be lying, or this person must be lying. The fact is, like, history becomes legend, legend becomes myth. The Jedi haven't seen the Sith for at this point, like 800 years. This guy says, you would call me a Sith. Does that mean he calls himself a Sith yet? And he's working for Darth Plagueis? Maybe. To me, it means that he thinks of himself as a dark side user, and Darth Plagueis is watching him, ready to maybe recruit one of or both of them into the actual Sith. We don't know. But I feel like that. I really like how much of that openness and mystery it brought us, as well as the idea of like, yeah, Jedi do lie. Jedi cover up some things. And so the idea that one or two Jedi know this, but they don't tell anyone, including that Yoda might be in on the secret, like, I love that.
Yeah. And so, kind of based on what you said, a question I have for you guys, do you think Chimer knows Plagueis is there? Wait, Plagueis?
Plagueis.
I don't know. And I've thought back and forth on that. You know, also to clarify, the only reason I even knew that was Plagueis was because I read the Expanded Universe book, which is not canon. But I know that the writer said they like wanted to make him look. They were pulling from like books and EU stories to kind of make it more obvious. But I understand that like it wasn't blatantly clear, and they didn't like put anything in the credits or anything. So in the, you know, we'll talk about the book at some point, but in the book he has a different, you know, he has a master, and it would be very curious to me if they're like saying that, you know, Plagueis' master is now out of the picture and he's maybe searching for an apprentice. Maybe this is like a precursor to him eventually finding Palpatine. I don't know. If he can successfully hide himself that well, I know we've seen it before, but that would be impressive to like erase yourself from the Force enough to like hide yourself from two powerful Force users. I don't know. I could see it making sense both ways, but I don't know. Do you have a thought, Matthew or Aaron? Do you think they know?
I think he doesn't know. And I will say, I also have read that Extended Universe novel. I love it. We're going to do our book club on it. So if you are a member, by the way, become a member, only $5 a month, $55 a year. You get all sorts of bonus credit, including we're going to do a full episode on that book. I think it is important to know that that book is now going to influence these stories going ahead. But I think if we start going and saying, oh, but on page 224 of the book, it says that this happens between Plagueis and Palpatine this year, so it can't happen this year, that like the book isn't becoming canon full stop. Like even with Disney books, sometimes that, you know, the canon changes a little bit, which I don't always think is bad. I think there have been moments where like queer characters were erased or stuff like that, but like you can't translate a book word for word, page for page onto the screen. It just doesn't work. You've got to change some things. So yeah, I'm really excited that all that's coming in. I don't think it's gonna be word for word though, so I don't want to start saying like, well, this happens in the book, so this is now canon.
Yeah.
To your question though, I guess because I've really zeroed in on, I love what he says there of, you would call me Sith. Because he often talks, one of the things that Chimer repeats again and again, which I love, is how the Jedi have this very black and white thinking. and that they are very strict rules, and things have to be in like it's either this or it's that. And I think what he's getting at there is this idea of like there are Jedi and there are Sith, and that's it. And ignoring the fact that there can be people on both the light side and the dark side, and maybe somewhere in the middle, who are Force users who are not necessarily part of these two groups. So I think that either he doesn't know that he's there, or if he does, he's maybe trying to impress that guy, and he's trying to impress Plagueis, but doesn't really know the context of it, or that like since the conversation he had about, you would call me Sith, Plagueis has like connected with him since then. I don't know what it is, and I don't want to get locked in too much into any speculation.
Yeah.
I think it's possible he knows. I think that would make for a weaker story, though. I think the story is much better if Kymer at this point does not have a Darth name, if he does not think of himself as Sith.
I think he thinks of himself as like a nobody, just like a shadow. Because I mean, like, first of all, I don't know. I mean, I know I wasn't here last week, but did y'all talk about the fact that like he was indeed known to Venestra, that she knew who he was?
Yeah. Oh, I think
we talked about that. Yeah, how that is most likely her apprentice.
Yeah. So like, it's just crazy to me.
Oh wait, no, she said for sure it was a former apprentice.
Yeah,
it's crazy to me that like he was a Jedi. So like, maybe he doesn't see himself as Sith. Maybe he just sees himself. I see it more as he sees himself kind of how, like, at least before Tales of the Jedi might have changed things, kind of how Dooku saw himself, not necessarily a Sith, but like just someone with an idealist, as Kiara Mundi like to say. Like, he had different ideas. He believed the Jedi were corrupt. Like, there's definitely, I think, a middle ground between a full-blown Sith and someone who, believes a little differently. And we'll also note, he doesn't have Sith eyes. He doesn't have the telltale physical sign of someone who's fully given himself to the dark side, while Plagueis on screen did. So I don't see him as a full-blown Sith by any means. I see him as a dark side user, but not a full-blown Sith Lord by any means.
Yeah, I think that's true.
I like what you said, Alex, about him being like a shadow. Like, I agree. I think he would think of himself like as an outcast, like as a anomaly almost. Right. I don't think he knows that Plagueis is there. Plagueis. I'm just going to say it wrong this whole time, but I'll do my best.
Fine.
I don't think he knows that Plagueis is watching him. I do think it's realistic for Plagueis to be able to hide himself from the two of them with the Force, because, I mean, for one, I think we've seen time and time again, tunnel vision does a lot of work. And if the two of them are thinking about each other and only each other, they might not notice him. Also, yes, this is not canon, but in the books, Plagueis is known to be able to lower his body temperature and slow his heart rate and things like that to be able to completely hide himself from all sorts of scanners and Force beings. So that's something.
Remember, Kymer hid himself from like there were a bunch of Jedi who were
from Soul.
Kymer and had no ability to sense him in the Force.
Yeah. I mean, Luke hid himself from the whole freaking galaxy in Episode 8 or for a while. I mean, people can hide themselves. People can shut themselves off from the Force.
Yeah. And I think it is interesting, kind of with Vernestra being his former master. He's afraid of her. He really is. I believe that he is, based on how we've seen him react to that. Like, the moment he felt her, he just kind of dipped out of whatever altercation was going on. Like, it was the Osha and the May and the Soul just died.
Especially because, remember, I think it is May or Osha who points this out. Those marks on his back, the scars, look like whip marks. I think we're supposed to think that there was some, and I don't think that she like necessarily physically abused him as a child, but maybe that like they got into a fight of some point, or like she felt like she had to kind of like discipline him in some way. Depending how you look at that, that could be Vernestra looking somewhat bad or really bad. But certainly I think that like she was probably not the best master to Padawan Quymir by any means. Quymir.
I interpreted that as he has those scars from her because he had a very clear like break from the Jedi and sort of, quote unquote, fall to the dark side. And she made the decision of, I need to kill him because he's going to do too much harm. So I think that those marks are from a battle where she thought he was killed, because when she senses him on Brendok, she says, "You're
You're alive.
Exactly. So that's my hypothesis on the whips.
Yeah.
In the
That's
show, I
possible.
don't think anyone said anything about it looking like whips, but you're right. Osha asked, like, "Oh, what are these scars about?" And he said,
Yeah.
"Someone stabbed me in the back," basically.
Yeah, I didn't put together they were whip marks until you just said that. But that makes total sense. And I think that Vanessa strikes me. I haven't read the books, I know, but she strikes me as someone who like feels very confident in her decisions and may just be buying fully into the whole decadence of the Jedi era. I mean, think about the outfit she wears at the end when she's talking to May. Like it's very like refined and high class, and almost bougie. And
It's
she is
regal.
it is. And like she's very like okay pushing all this under the rug and like not telling the truth. And it just feels like it's like when you have something so good and like you think that like telling some lies about it won't put it in danger, but you tell enough lies that it ends up making it all fall apart. Like that's what it kind of feels like. And so it wouldn't surprise me if she did that to her Padawan. Also real quick, I have a new answer. Maybe I think that Plagueis is tracking and following Osha and not Chimera.
Ooh.
I don't think he's actually interested in Chimera as much because we know eventually that Plagueis figures out Palpatine how to create life or manipulate the Force. So why would he not be hunting down versions of the Force?
Hold on. We do not know that.
That's actually canon. I checked Wikipedia. That part is canon. That part alone is canon. That he was searching for a way to create life in the Force.
Sure. Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
But I want to make clear, the book that we're talking about
is not canon.
Puts out the idea that in some sort of ethereal way, that what Plagueis and Palpatine were doing led to the creation of Anakin, and that specific idea is very possible. As we keep talking about, maybe this is how the dark side yearned to use it, but that's not canon in the slightest.
Correct.
It's entirely possible.
The canon part is that he was indeed, though, searching for ways to create life in the Force. Like he was studying that. That part is canon. Right. And so, like, from what Solas told us, version Sis would be the natural way to do that. So perhaps Plagueis was looking for versions in the Force, and he finds Osha and May, and he chooses to follow. Maybe he was there when it was just Chimera and May. He was studying May, and now Osha's here instead. But I think that would make sense to me, is that he was actually seeking them out and maybe not Chimera. I don't know.
That's a good point. I think that's probably good. I like that theory. I'll just say.
Yeah. I think that's very possible, especially because, and to me, this is also on the why I don't think Chimera is a Sith. The Sith don't want to just be left alone. The Sith have a specific mission. They want to rule. They want to get revenge on the Jedi for what they see as the Jedi destroying them in the past. Chimera doesn't want that, or at least he says he doesn't want that. Maybe he secretly does, but he basically is, to me, not a fascist. He's an extreme libertarian. He's I want to be left alone to do whatever the heck I want, and that involves hurting people if they get in my way. But I don't fundamentally have a goal to go out and kill all these people. I just want to be left alone. But in the world that I live in, the Jedi will, if they find out about me, they'll hunt me down. So I have to take these more extreme measures.
He wants freedom, not power.
Right. And here's again the extremeness of the libertarianness. He wants the freedom to swing his fist without worrying if it hits somebody else's face.
Right.
But yeah, it's very, very different than so I can understand, if either Plagueis had looked at him and maybe been like, he's just a pretender. This isn't worth my time. Or had only seen Osha and then along the way found found Chimera as well.
Right.
It leads to a different question I want to ask. Oh, go ahead.
Quick comment on that. I wonder if, I think you're right that Plagueis is probably more interested in Osha and May. And I wonder if he's uninterested in Chimera because Chimera is so set in his quote, quote, morals, I feel like Chimera really knows who he is and who he wants to be. And that's not what you're looking for in a Sith acolyte, because you need someone that you can break down and stomp into the ground until they hate you so much that they fall to the dark side, basically. That's my understanding of how Sith works. And so that's an interesting thing just kind of popped in my head, is well, yeah, maybe he's not interested in Chimera because he's not a good option for an apprentice. Even if he is powerful, he's not mentally right to try and persuade to the Sith way.
I think you're right. I mean, I think it's either like Maul style, getting beaten down to nothing and built back up, or Dooku Palpatine style, where they're very like seduced and like their kind of their ego is played upon. Where it doesn't feel like he has enough of either of those traits. So, like, there's nothing. His belief is, I just want to be free. I want to be alone. He doesn't have any political beliefs or any. There's nothing to manipulate, really. Like, I actually agreed with some of what Kymir was, and not the death and murder and do whatever you want part, but like his belief the Jedi are bloated and cause like all that. Like, a lot of it's sound. It's just that he's taken it a little too far. So,
I mean, to me, he's very much a Killmonger style villain in that regard of like, where the things that he's angry about are legitimate to be angry about. The things that he convinced that Osha's angry about and he listens to her are legitimate for Osha to want to be angry about. And we'll get all of that in a second, a little bit more, but I want to, the point though being that, but he goes way too far with it. And you can argue about that's true about Killmonger. That's a whole other debate. The part of what you guys were saying, though, especially what you were just saying there, Erin, really reminds me of that I loved about this is I think sometimes, especially if you watch the prequels and then some of the Clone Wars stuff, there's a desire to believe that Palpatine was behind, that every single thing happened exactly as Palpatine wanted. And one thing I like that the Legacy books make clear is that that's not the case. Like, Naboo is a complete fuck up from his perspective, but that what he is good at is able to constantly be like, okay, well, let me find the advantage in this situation. The situation's changed. Let me find the advantage in this situation, this situation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. All the way to, okay, Anakin's gonna be the one for me. Oh wait, no, what if Luke is the one for me?
Got greedy.
Where I'm going, yeah, exactly. Where I'm going with that is I've now rewatched it twice. The first time just to do it. The second time I wanted to look for something specific, which is I started to wonder, what if Kymir wanted Osha all along? And he like always knew that May wouldn't be good enough, but he kind of knew that he kind of wanted all this to happen. And rewatching it with that specifically in mind, if that was the goal, the writers did a really bad job. Because I think there's so much evidence that that's not the case. And I really like that Kymir did absolutely think May could be the Acolyte. And then when things changed and when he was like, oh, May is betraying me, May, like, it may even be that he wanted May to betray him as like part of her fall. Like, I would even believe that. But then when all that happened and he saw Osha take action and he realized Osha's feelings in all this, he was like, oh, actually, well, maybe this is an even better opportunity. And I just like that idea of the Sith much more because on some, it's kind of like what we were saying about Dooku. Like, Dooku makes a lot of sense if he's someone who has his own motivations, but, is being, the strings are being pulled by Palpatine instead of just like, mwahaha, we're both Sith Lords.
Matt, I have a question on your theory. Go for it. So let me ask this for both of you as well, but like, did you both see when Soul described the two twins, like, as being a virgins, one being split? Did you all see May as like the dark side and Osha as the light side of this split? Or did you see them both as just individual, no one leading? Because to me, May felt like she leaned dark side early on and Osha leaned light side. And then obviously there was a switch kind of later on. So I was curious if maybe Kymir sensed the darkness in May, thought that would be the best case for him to like get an Acolyte, but then he was wrong. And that's, Osha ends up being the dark one. I don't know. Did you all see it that way or no?
So this is kind of a segue into some sort of things we don't like, but I think it's actually a good way to have the conversation. Let's meander a little. I think that there were 2 or 3 plot lines that this show handled phenomenally well. The problem was there were like 6 or 7 plot lines. I think one of the things I was most dissatisfied with was this idea of, oh my gosh, it's one being split into 2 people. Because I don't know what that means. And more importantly, I don't know why that's a bad thing. Identical twins start out as one like tiny little embryo that eventually splits. Like, that's what twins are.
Right.
It sounds like this is supposed to mean something different, but it felt to me like it was never satisfactorily explained.
Yeah.
And the fear that Saul had about it, and even that some of the other Jedi had about it, including Indara, of like, oh, I can't believe that happened. Like, they never actually showed us or told us why that's an issue.
And also, it's confusing. Was it a normally created child that was then split artificially, or was it like the way Anakin's described, just split out of midichlorians and out of thin air? Like that was never to me clearly stated either.
Erin?
I have lots of thoughts. So first, just to answer you, Alex, I personally, my understanding from the show was that this child was fully born of the Force. These children, basically. I don't think that there was necessarily a normal like gestation period or like growing. I think it was kind of like, and they were there. As far as the one being
wait a
split,
minute. But the Dathmiri of the mother says, "I
You're right.
carried them."
I carry it,
You're
right?
right,
Which
okay.
is why I question, like, was there some sort of like fertilization process that happened not Force related, or was like, did the one mother literally use the Force to like impregnate the other one? That's I'm not
That's
understanding how
my
it happened.
understanding.
Okay.
Because Mother Coral said, I carried them. Mother Anastasia said, I created
them.
Right.
Right.
So
And
my
I
understanding
carried
with
them tells me they were like two distinctly different beings as
in the womb.
embryos, as fetuses. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So then my understanding of like the idea of one person being split, or the theory I like, I guess I'd say, is that it's not a light and dark split, but it's a 50-50 split. And they are the antithesis of each other. And that's why they didn't get along well when they were younger. And it's why they're still constantly missing each other with everything they're trying to do. One of them wants to make amends, the other one doesn't. They fight and all this stuff. It's just, I saw it as like they are the anti each other. They both have equal parts of dark and light. They both have equal opportunity to be Jedi or dark side follower or whatever it is they want to be. But that what the one being split into two means is that they are fundamentally opposite.
So you do think that like one's kind of dark leaning, one's kind of light leaning?
No.
No. Okay. Sorry.
Did you listen to me, Alex?
I did.
just
You
said
said they're antithesis of each other. Antithesis means for opposites.
No, I think, Erin, tell me if I'm correct here. I think what Erin is getting at is, and it goes to the fact that the yin yang symbol, or at least kind of this universe's version of that, is shown all the time. And like, an essential part of the yin yang idea is like light. There's light that blends into darkness and darkness that blends into light. But even the brightest part of the light has a circle of darkness, and the brightest and the darkest of the dark has a circle of bright. And so the idea that these two could at one point in their lives lean these two ways, and then at a different part of their lives lean in different ways, makes a lot of sense to me. Is that kind of, Erin, what you're getting at?
I think I understand that.
Without
Sorry,
they're
Erin.
both
I was
incomplete without
confused.
the other.
When you were saying antithesis, I was confused because in my brain I was like, that means opposite. So okay, I get it now though. I get it.
Yeah, what I'm saying is like opposite personalities.
Got
They
it,
both
got
have
it.
equal amounts of light and dark. But like if you imagine one person with a fully formed personality and then you just do like a 50 split of that. That's what I'm saying by that.
Fair.
Right. Especially because the split that happens between them when they're still on Bendock with the tribe of witches isn't really light side, dark side. It kind of is, just in that like the witches seem to be leaning more dark side themselves, but Osha doesn't have like moral objections to them. She's just like the kid who's bored in her small town and wants to go see the world.
That's a good way to
Luke
put it.
Skywalker-esque in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So let me get into the other thing that I think is kind of the biggest thing that I had a problem with about this show that I think a lot of other folks did, or in some ways I feel like a lot of the small problems stem from this one. I think that this show really fundamentally didn't work as an 8 short episode thing. And there's two reasons for that. One is that I think there's so much subtlety in the story that it's just hard to keep track of all of it when you're watching it once a week over such a long time. For example, I remember watching that very first fight scene between May and Indara and thinking like, okay, I get the idea that Indara would allow her compassion for someone else to make her vulnerable to an attack. But this felt like a very sloppy, ham-fisted way to tell me that. Then when I'm watching, and like an hour later, I'm watching one of the first episodes where we see Indara and see some of her guilt and some of her grief over what has happened. actually her acting that way makes a lot more sense because
Mhm.
I saw it an hour ago. But when I saw it 6 weeks ago, now it's really hard to make that kind of connection.
That's a great point, Matthew.
And I think especially the day and night episodes being split into two, I think made it so much harder for people to understand. But the other thing I think is that when you have a once a week episode, you have to have that episode has to be to some extent self-contained, and it has to probably have a fight scene, and it probably has to have some kind of like dramatic cliffhanger. And I think that also really hurt the storytelling because those things just took up so much storytelling time, but also I think that sometimes they felt unnatural or unneeded. Like early in the first episode, there's this whole prison break sequence that I'd completely forgotten about, where Osha has been captured and she's on this prison ship, but for some reason none of the Jedi are going. Yeah, you totally
I
forgot
forgot
that.
about that too.
And none of the Jedi are with her. And there's this action adventure sequence of her, of the other people breaking out and leaving her in, and she's got to survive the crash and all this. And I was like, what? This is so completely unnecessary.
Why was that there? You're right.
Okay, it's needed for her to somehow it's needed for the Jedi to not know where she is and to believe that maybe she's done something nefarious as part of her escape. But you can do that with like 30 seconds of material instead of 6 or 7 minutes the way they did it.
Yeah.
And I just all throughout the show, there's a lot of that. And some of those things fell flat or just didn't make sense. And I think that's what really hurt the show.
And that's the part where it's like me being entertained comes in heavy because like I just happily sit through those periods of time. I'm like, yeah, side quest. But I understand exactly what you're saying. Like, yeah, that is not necessary. If what we need is for her to be missing and them to think she did something bad, Yord never had to go to that ship where she was living. They could have just started with where's Osha, you know?
Right.
So that's a great point, but it's not something that bothers me. But this is why I like talking about it and like hearing other sides.
And to be clear, I'm entertained by it as well. It's not that I think that it's not entertaining. It's that, if we go back and listen to our episodes on episode 2, episode 3, we talked about feeling a little lost and feeling a little like we're not sure about that. And I think part of that is because in the earlier episodes, we'd had scenes like that were really fun, but didn't actually help us connect the story in the way we needed.
Yeah.
And I also think that, Star Wars is, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, but it's notoriously like the story's designed to kind of drop you in the middle and you piece it together from there. And that works exceptionally well in a movie format because you're getting the story filled in within that 2-hour period. And any cliffhanger, all you have to do is go back and watch the one previous movie and then the next movie happens. Like,
yeah,
when it's in a show format and they're trying to do a similar way of storytelling, it is a lot harder if you're not watching it back to back to back because, like you said, it's not like, oh, this happened an hour ago. It's like, oh, this happened weeks ago. Like I couldn't even remember that Indara and May fought in the first episode until you brought it back up. Listen, it was 8 weeks ago. My point is that like I am focusing on the current stuff and like 9 weeks ago now. And it is harder to follow stories that way. And I mean, I felt that way about, a lot of Star Wars shows, but I think that like this one really leaned into that storytelling style, which I love in the movie format, but it's harder to follow versus like The Mandalorian is not that way. It's like the character you're learning about as it kind of fills in around it, but what the story is kind of progressing in a chronological order. Same with Andor, same with all these other shows, like they're filling in around it character development wise, but not storyline wise.
I mean, Andor had 4 distinct, like 2 to 3 episode arcs.
Correct.
So that you never if they were important, but like what you were watching in week 12, you didn't have to remember the exact details from week 2.
Exactly.
And then Clone Wars did that a lot, and then Clone Wars and Rebels also both had a lot of self-contained episodes. So I think like that. I just, and we're gonna do a whole episode on this, so I don't want to go too deep into it. Yeah, but I feel like Disney's, because I think this problem is also happening in the MCU with Disney, that they just need to figure out. Like for me, I think that what we should get to is a place where someone writes the story, and then they look at the story and say, what's the best way to tell this? Should it be a movie? Should it be a TV show? Should it be a single release TV show? And like the economics of Hollywood may make that impossible. But I wish that because I think if someone had really looked at the story, and my understanding is that there's some evidence that this idea originally was going to be a movie, but then because of the failure of Solo and some other things like that, they've sort of shifted to much more of the TV model. So who knows?
It's also so silly to me that they stopped making anthology movies because one single one did poorly. Rogue One is beloved by the fan base. Just because Solo,
it's my favorite movie.
Like, just because Solo flopped a bit, you're gonna abandon ship completely. Like, I get we needed a movie break, and I agree we needed a movie break. Like, I don't want to Marvel this to the point where we're in Marvel now, but like,
well, again, we're gonna do a whole episode on that,
okay.
So we won't get too lost on that. But
sorry.
Exactly. What are other things you guys didn't like about the show? What were some of the problems you had?
I was just gonna say that one thing that bothered me, and we brought it up before, is we got backstories and inner thoughts of like all the main characters, except for the Wookiee.
Yeah.
Just because my man can't speak, basic, I don't get to know like his backstory. He didn't even get a death on screen. He's just in a chair dead. Like, I don't know. I was so excited to finally see a Wookiee Jedi on screen. And then like the most in-depth we got with him was when he had his mind controlled by the witches and he was attacking people.
Mm-hmm.
That's just like, I don't know. I get that Wookiees are a little like, a little bit of an enigma. And like, that's how Chewbacca was a little enigma-like, but I would have liked to have a little more about him. And like, I feel like, I also feel like the show in general could have used either different editing in that, like, do we need the whole prison break scene? Do we need all that? Like, we have limited real estate. Maybe put in some more like explaining portions of the story in there, or like one more episode. I don't know, to just like tie some things together a little bit better. I just feel like we were jumping around a lot. And again, maybe when I watch it all the way through, it'll feel a lot more cohesive. But I felt like I was kind of like left like wondering a lot of things throughout the show.
Yeah. I have something to say about Kalnaka. It's not a bad thing, and it's not a canon thing, but it's just a theory It's just a theory that I saw online and thought was interesting. I thought I'd just share with you guys. I think I sent it to you both. I don't know if you saw it, but there is something in Wookiee lore called Mad Claw. And apparently, like, in Wookiee culture, it is basically a disgrace to use your claws to hurt someone else. Like, you can use other things. You can use your fists, you can use your mouth, you can use weapons, but the idea of using your claw, it's basically like that diminishes you to being a beast, is the idea. And it's what they call mad claw. And so when somebody has committed that, when they've used their claws against another being, they're disgraced and they're kicked out. And so this is something that was part of the Old Republic lore in the Kotor games. Zalbar was a Mad Claw Wookiee. That's why he hung out with this Twi'lek mission, because his people didn't accept him anymore. He had done the unacceptable. And so that's something that the online theory posited. Well, maybe that goes into Kalnaka's severe isolation. Is that not only...
Because to be clear, we see that Kalnaka had used his claws on
exactly
the Padawan.
He has a scar on his
Torben.
face. Yeah, on Torben, like long-term scar.
Yeah, exactly. So that was just something I saw online. I was like, oh, that's interesting. I like little lore like that, where it's like, yeah, you didn't need to know it, but since you do know it, it's not confirmed, but it's kind of interesting.
Yeah, for sure. I will also say, and this is again, I'm positive, and Alex, tell me if I'm wrong. Erin and I were constantly able to be like, oh, that's a cool Easter egg from the High Republic books. But it felt to me like you never had a moment where you were like, I'm not able to understand this. I'm not able to appreciate this because I don't know the High Republic books.
At no point did I feel like the High Republic books were a barrier to me. I think that much like a lot of Star Wars, the more like backstory and canon the more it enriches your experience. And it's like, oh, I love picking up on these little things. But no, I felt like I understood most of it. The only part, like, again, it wasn't such a story at all. It was like the whole like hyperspace recurring joke, like, oh, you didn't get sick in hyperspace, and Vanessa keeps snapping at different Jedi. And I like that I learned that from y'all in one of our previous episodes. So
I do want to say we may have been wrong with our theory about it being related to the Great Hyperspace event or whatever. In the books, a book that I haven't read yet, apparently she has a tendency to have really like severe force visions when she's in hyperspace. Like something about that almost interdimensional travel. She has like these really aggressive visions, and like she hears a lot of voices. And so someone posited online that that's why they think she's uncomfortable with hyperspace. So
Yeah.
Could be both, could be one or the other.
Yeah, either way, totally makes sense though.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't really have any negative things. I didn't sit around and stew about what I didn't like.
No, I mean, that's great.
No,
That's great.
yeah, that's a great way to be. And
Let,
I
let-
think
only-
I liked more than I disliked, honestly.
Yeah.
I'd say I'm the same way.
Yeah.
I think it's like, it's more that because so much of it was so good, it's a little more frustrating to me that other parts weren't as good.
Mhm. Yeah.
And I think the last thing
Sure, go ahead.
I think for me, the last thing of that, and I do want us to move on to like talking about the Jedi, I think the flashbacks were handled pretty badly. Particularly the second time. I think because after Last Jedi got such mixed reviews, people were a little bit like gun shy about doing the whole Rashomon thing of like where you never actually fully know the truth. But I wish that that second set of flashbacks had been done more with voiceovers. So it was very clear, like, this is Saul telling you the real version of the story, or even like Saul telling you a version of the story, Saul telling May a version of the story, and Keimer telling Osha a version of the story. I just think that could have been well done. And I think because of it, like, it feels like a lot of people missed the point. And part of that I think is media literacy, but I think a lot of it is also like we had to really kind of dig deep to find the point.
Yeah, I agree. Let's
That's
talk about
valid.
the Jedi.
Yeah.
The
So
Jedi.
what do you guys think of what we learned about the Jedi in this show?
I loved that for the first time, not the first time, but it made me really dislike them. Like, I have had inklings of it. You know, I have believed their hubris led to the fall of Palpatine. I believe that Luke was right in a lot of what he said about the Jedi in Episode 8. But this is the first time I was seeing that hubris in my face, episode after episode. Like, I can't fall to the dark side. Everything I'm doing has to be, right. Or, I'm doing this for the right reasons. It's almost like all of them acted like Anakin in a little bit of a way, but not as extreme, but like they all believed they were doing the right thing and were following their own personal moral code and didn't think that they could be corrupted. I think that Vanestra herself is like, I mean, not the dark side, like per se, maybe, but like has kind of tapped into some sketchy practices. And the fact that she does appear before Yoda at the end, we don't know, obviously, it was just pure speculation, but like if Yoda was aware of these events and then didn't act on them during the fall of the Republic, that's damning. That is like showing that even Yoda has just immense hubris, which I know in the Clone Wars we explored his hubris and it's there, but it deepened them. They were no longer just those like stoic space monks. They're like these very human, very fallible. It makes like falling, like I always wondered as a kid, like Yoda kept saying over and over again, this is the path to the dark side. Don't fall, don't fall. I'm like, is it that? Like, no one falls. Like, we've seen like 1-2 people fall to the dark side. Like, is it that common? But like, you see the Jedi now, and you're like, oh, they were like really fallible. Like, you had to draw that into your brain. Otherwise, like, people would be falling and leaving left and right. Like, I don't know. It made them feel very human to me, which made me like them less, but in a good way.
On that kind of similarity to Anakin, I actually compare Anakin and Vernestra pretty closely together because she was the youngest Jedi to ever be knighted, the youngest Jedi to ever have a Padawan. She was kind of this star pupil. And so this idea that by the time she's lived over 100 years, that she would have such ego and such hubris to truly believe what I think is right, period. I think it makes a lot of sense. And I think it's a place that Anakin absolutely ended up in, except just to a more extreme way. And we don't know. Maybe she falls in some way. But I just think it's interesting to see two people, or two Jedi specifically, that were really like ego pumped from a young age, and how they seem to be very different. But through this show, we see that Vern has a lot more similarities to Anakin than she seems to have in the books.
You're making me think that Anakin read about Vernestra in a little book and was like, wait, she became a master at what age?
Yeah. So even the Jedi had a gifted and talented program that they didn't support enough. And yeah, I really like this too. And for me, we often have kind of like joking names at the start of these recordings. For some reason, they're not appearing right now. Normally it's the other two, but today I decided to have mine, and mine was just Matthew Ajab, AJAB. The idea being it like a play on ACAB, all cops are bastards to all Jedi are bastards. And I was being somewhat humorous, but somewhat intentional, because I think I'm often hesitant about. I'm not going to talk too much about policing in this country in America, but I want to say a bit about it because I think it's very relevant, and I think it's part of what the show is saying. I often wrestle with the statement of ACAB because I think it can lead people to think what you're saying is that every single individual police officer is a terrible person. And I don't believe that that's true by any means.
Mhm.
But I think what it's saying is that the institution itself is so fundamentally fatally flawed that participating in that fundamentally marks you in a way that you can't escape. And that, like, no matter how good of a cop you are still part of that fundamentally broken institution, and you're helping support that institution. I don't think the Jedi are that bad by any means, but I think, and we're going to do this, is actually going to be another episode. I think one of the things that happens with institutions, particularly institutions that are set up to do good, is that they start to get to a point where the mission to do good and the survival of the organization, the institution, in order to good, start to get mixed up.
Mm.
And like a lot of the worst things about the police is when, one of their own does something terrible, which happens all the time. And sometimes I think it is just pure, like, well, who cares that they killed this person? We have racist feelings or sexist feelings or whatever. And so we're going to cover it up. Sometimes it's just they're my buddy and I don't care about anything else. I think that's the case a lot of times. But a lot of times I think it is by people who, in their mind, the police are doing the right thing. And people will doubt the ability of the police to do the right thing if people know that sometimes the police do the wrong thing. So we have to cover it up.
Mm.
And like in the military, in war crimes tribunals, this exact kind of logic has been talked about all the time, that we didn't want people to lose their trust and their faith in the institution. And a lot of the cases, like, no, they should lose their trust and faith in the institution. That's the whole point. And to me, that's where I really see Vanestra coming from. And
Absolutely.
I do think we're supposed to think that people like Saul, people like Vanestra are the exception in the Jedi right now, but that there's enough of them and there's enough of an institutional bias that, like she looks at Senator Rainberg, who I think actually is probably I want his quote about you think you can control the uncontrollable. What, you mean the Force? No emotions. Like that whole quote is just, I want that on a t-shirt. It is so perfect. And it is every complaint I've ever had about the Jedi. But just this whole idea of, and she does it, but also Indara does it to some extent. We've got to protect our own. We've got to protect ranks. And Saul very much does it. And to me, like, again, I think when you see instances of police brutality, we see instances of child welfare workers taking people out of their homes and stuff like that, there's an awful lot of racism, there's an awful lot of hate, and a lot of times it's motivated from the worst possible places. But I think it's easy to think those people are all monsters. When I think, in fact, a lot of, these things happen because people think, oh, this person's a danger. I have to stop that danger because their racism affects that, or because they look at this child in a situation they don't understand and say, this child would be so much better if it was adopted by a white family or something like that. And to be very clear, I'm not justifying that thinking in the slightest. I'm saying it's important for us to understand that it's not monsters who do that, because then we can understand it could be us who does it. And yeah, to me, that's what this is really all about with the Jedi, is just this idea of they're not fundamentally good, they're not fundamentally bad, they're an institution. And it has some good points and it has some bad points and it has some really bad points. And here we're seeing it at its worst.
That makes a lot of sense. I kind of like that theory.
Well, we're losing Alex in a few minutes. Do you guys want to talk about all the stuff I just said just there? Do you want to just kind of jump into our bonus section where we're going to talk about what a season 2 of the show would look like?
I'll say something really quick.
Yeah,
I do
please.
like the idea of like really being intentional about the idea of people who make mistakes within an institution are not monsters. And specifically what you said, because then you realize it could be you. And that is so important, is to not so fully, I mean, I think in a lot of things in life, and I mean, it's just funny, like seeing how my dad views this show, of this idea of like, well, it has to be good or bad, you know? And it's like, well, it's not. On the good side, there are monsters and there are heroes. And you can't make a complete distinction, because on the bad side, there are monsters and there are heroes. And yeah, I really like what you said about just everyone could use with a little self-awareness. All the Jedi, Chimera, Osha, just a little self-awareness of like, all these people I am hating on I could be them if I were put in a
Yeah.
situation similar.
Like,
And
So
when-
yeah, I like what you had to say about that.
And I appreciate that this show, speaking to what you're talking about, Matthew, that this show, like, it really, old Star Wars, it was never like hard black and white, but it was much more black and white. There was the dark side, there was the light side, there was the Sith, there was the Jedi, and there isn't as much in between. And like, that wiggle room has been like touched on, explored here and there, absolutely. But to me, this show has done better than any other show in really like hammering that home, because like the bad guy is not all bad, the good guys aren't all good. Like, it's very like that yin yang description, and like they're not all monsters, and like I can disagree with them, but like every single one of us, I don't care how good of a person you are, we all have skeletons in the closet. We've all done bad things in our lives, things we regret, things that we're not proud of. And that's part of what makes us human. It doesn't make us bad people. It doesn't make us, like, I don't, at the end of his life, I would not describe Soul as a bad person. I would describe Soul as a passionate, misguided man who might have just followed, his beliefs that might have been a little misguided, but like, I always think he tried to do the best for others. He tried to think out of his own heart. He always tried, and he didn't always succeed. But I don't see that as someone being a monster. I see a monster being someone who constantly makes decisions that they know will harm others, harm themselves, and harm the people around them. And it's just cool to me to see the depth of the Jedi in that way.
Yeah, he never believes he's doing anything but the right thing.
Right.
But he has the Jedi version of white savior complex. He has Jedi savior complex, and I think the same, like, to me, one of the most striking moments is when Vanestra says, she says this was all done by Saul, a rogue Jedi, and someone says, like, doesn't this mean we should look into it? She says, Saul was, the language that she uses about how like this wouldn't happen again, that Saul was a very deep exception. To me, what it sounded like is like cops talking about Derek Chauvin or about like other bad, like that was just one bad cop. Our institution is fundamentally better, stuff like that.
Yeah.
So,
I
there's a lot
view
more.
him. I was just gonna make a joke.
Yeah.
I view him at the end of the show as a lost soul.
Yeah, I think it's true.
Oh my God.
That's all.
What did I just say?
That was painful.
Lost soul, SOUL.
Oh,
for those who are watching, are not watching along, I did just remove Erin from the stage.
Guys.
But now Erin's back.
That was
all right.
time
Well,
out.
there's so much more we could say about this. We're gonna have a couple more episodes about the show, but I do want to talk. I do want to give our members their bonus section, which is specifically going to be about what would a season 2 of the show look like, or should there be a season 2, all that kind of things. Alex has to go in a few minutes, so we'll jump right into that. So again, please become a member. $5 a month, $55 a year. Please think about all the other ways you can help support the podcast. Most importantly, though, we have spoken.
Why risk discovery? Well, I did wear a mask.
It was a great line.
I'll also say in closing, we got 2 fantastic pieces of feedback. I wanted to get to one of them, at least one of them today. Our episode ran long, but we'll definitely get to both of them in the upcoming episodes.
Okay.
We're done speaking.